In the previous episode, Skeleton and Bubble entered the city. Now, in the transfer hall, Skeleton steps in to complete his class change ceremony. Meanwhile, as he is away, Babble encounters a strange squirrel-like guy who warns her that she is being deceived by her pet skeleton. After this odd encounter, the stranger leaves, and Skeleton finishes his ceremony. He returns to Babble, eager to show off his new appearance. Unexpectedly, Babble is on the verge of tears, which worries Skeleton. He asks her why, and she explains what happened. Without hesitation, Skeleton comforts her and invites her to eat something delicious, making her feel much better. Meanwhile, the squirrel-like guy sits inside a bar, sipping his drink, still in shock that Babble rejected his friendship offer. He originally planned to scare Babble and see how the monster she was with would react, but she didn't take the bait. Since a monster entered the city, many people should already be aware of it, so he isn't too bothered and instead remains excited about what the future holds. At the same time, Bubble is enjoying the meal that Skeleton has generously given her, happily munching away at everything she can grab. Skeleton then tells her that he will help her improve and level up her job so she can participate in the Academy's daily selection. Only players at level 40 can take the entrance exam for the 3 top universities of Azulis each year. Previous participants also get another chance to enter, gaining the opportunity to accumulate valuable clues and connections. The schools require far greater skill and efficiency than regular self-training. There are also several legendary players and an NPC instructor who teaches about this. Right at the peak of his class change, Skeleton receives an unexpected message. He's shocked that a monster can even receive mail, but what surprises him even more is the message itself. It says that the sender has never seen a monster change occupation so quickly. They ask if he wants to know why he transmigrated and how he can return to the real world. To find out, they instruct him to complete the main quest, or he will find his answer. The message ends with a wish for good luck and a warning that he is being watched. Recalling all of this, Skeleton becomes furious and loudly declares that he will win and see who's really playing the game. Surprisingly, Babble enthusiastically responds, saying that's the right fighting spirit. She, too, needs to increase her fighting spirit, so she orders more food. However, Skeleton realizes that if she keeps eating like this, they'll run out of money. After finishing their meal, they walk outside, but Babble is still eating. Skeleton tells her to eat less, although food here won't make her gain weight, it's extremely expensive. Even a rich person wouldn't be able to afford to feed her forever. She cheerfully says she understands but completely ignores him. To change the subject, she asks what they're going to do next. Skeleton states that later, they'll go to the Academy's deity selection exam. With someone like him as her pet, her current level is enough to skip straight to the second exam. After that, they'll focus on leveling her up so she's fully prepared for the second exam, which takes place in 10 days. Hearing this, Babble is ecstatic. Later, at the 10-mile slope, goblins and lymphs are hard at work building their new base. Skeleton is shocked by their rapid progress. It's only been 3 days, yet they're nearly finished. As he marvels at the new fortress, the monsters spot him and immediately charge forward. However, he effortlessly dodges their attacks and realizes they don't recognize him. He decides to give them a lesson. Now defeated on the ground, the monsters understand they can't win. But they still remember what their master taught them. So, they use their ultimate ability, retreat. In an instant, they all vanish from sight. Bubble is stunned and asks if these are really the monsters he considers tamed. Skeleton responds that their command execution is flawless. When they can't win, they retreat. By that standard, they are quite obedient. He then calls for Fat Skeleton, commanding him to stop hiding. Hearing his master's voice, Fat Skeleton eagerly emerges from underground, excitedly asking why his master chose to transform. They sit down, and Skeleton explains everything that has happened. Now, Chunky understands that Bubble is his master's owner. Skeleton then asks Chunky how they managed to progress so quickly. Chunky explains that after realizing goblins have stronger HP and strength than they do, they recruited some. By working together, they can now defeat level 30 players. However, they also realized their escape chances weren't high enough. So, they built a fortress on the surface, but it's just a decoy.
The real bunker allows them to retreat underground instantly. Since players aren't familiar with the tunnels, it makes them extremely difficult to track down. Even if players do find them, they won't know how to navigate the underground paths. Hearing this intricate plan, Skeleton is incredulous and asks if they're really just monsters. Chunky proudly responds that they've learned from the best and that best is him. Skeleton tells him to forget it, realizing he's even learned how to suck up to him. He then tells Chunky that they're here mainly to train Bubble for the upcoming entrance exam. Chunky immediately offers to let them train by fighting his group. But Skeleton smacks him, calling him an idiot because Bubble clearly isn't a PK player. Now that Skeleton knows Chunky isn't the brightest, he suggests that Chunky lead his subordinate monsters and Bubble to hunt other monsters for leveling up. Meanwhile, Skeleton needs to familiarize himself with his new abilities and body after the occupation transfer while also waiting for the Academy entrance exam notice. Normally, when a pet surpasses the player's level, loyalty begins to collapse, but they don't need to worry about that. In fact, with such a significant level gap, their ranking should be quite high. Now that he has explained everything they need to do, he encourages them to hurry and level up. Bubble only needs to reach level 39, while there are no restrictions for pets. He also plans to increase his own level as much as possible since, for now, there's no time to gather materials for a second transfer. Time flies as they train together, and even Skeleton's subordinates manage to capture the knight who had previously killed him. A few moments later, a messenger pigeon arrives at their location, delivering Bubble's Academy entrance exam notice. They receive it with excitement while the knight lies on the ground, completely beaten and immobilized. Upon opening the letter, Skeleton is shocked to see how many strong players are competing this year. He thought they were already powerful enough, but in reality, they rank 9th. Rather than feeling discouraged, he grows even more excited, realizing that this exam is going to be a thrilling challenge. Meanwhile, in the real world, Miss Chan, the secretary, delivers the data requested by Boss Don and places it on his desk. She then asks about Waden, a co-worker she hasn't seen in a few days. Don explains that Waden has been transferred to another department for technological scientific experiments, so he won't be around for a while. Meanwhile, Waden's parents, who had been traveling the world, are relieved that their son won't be bothering them anymore and happily cooperate with his preparations. Boss Don then asks Miss Chan why she's suddenly concerned about Waden and if she's thinking about him. She becomes so flustered that she can't even respond and hurriedly leaves, blushing. Elsewhere, a pink-haired girl named Ju arrives in front of a mansion, where she is greeted by a beautiful lady she calls Auntie. The woman welcomes her, and Yu wastes no time before heading inside to spend time with Babel. Coincidentally, Babel has just logged out of the game, and without hesitation, Yu pounces on her, cuddling up to her. Yu then asks if she's been enjoying Azure, to which Bubble cheerfully shares all her adventures inside the game, especially her experiences with Skeleton. Hearing this, Yu grows curious and asks Babel to tell her more about this skeleton she met. Babel immediately recounts her own version of the story, one she fully believes is 100% true. After listening to Babel's tales for an entire day, Yu starts to wonder if Babel might actually be dating an in-game character. Babel quickly denies it to avoid seeming strange, but Yu doesn't mind. She tells Babel to wait until she finishes work so she can log into the game, find her, and meet her little skeleton as well. After that, Yu leaves. Now alone in her room, Babel lies on her bed, reminiscing about the fun times she had in Azure. She can't help but sigh, wishing it were all real. But she decides to stop thinking about it and go to sleep, though that's not what actually happens. Moments later, back at the 10-mile slope inside Skeleton's camp, Babel is staring at him intensely, making him uneasy. He asks why she logged in at this time. She explains that she couldn't sleep and wanted to check on him, using the excuse that she was afraid he might be sneaking off somewhere. Seeing that she's genuinely concerned, Skeleton sits down and reassures her, saying, "How could I ever lie to you?" His comforting words put her at ease, and she soon falls asleep peacefully. The next day, the Academy entrance exam qualifiers finally begin. Thousands of people gather in one place, and numerous merchants, entrepreneurs, and scammers set up outside the entrance, selling all sorts of goods. Skeleton then explains that out of 30,000 applicants, only 2,000 will advance. The testing grounds and level limits will be set, and in the end, only 30 candidates will be selected.
Every exam also impacts the competition among all the different factions. The palace even broadcasts live matches and holds betting events, making the exam a grand spectacle for everyone. Seeing this familiar scene, Skeleton remembers how, before his transformation, he was just the leader of a small guild, always watching these events from the sidelines. But this time, he's actually here at the exam site himself. Suddenly, they are greeted by Yunk, who proudly declares that she will be looking after them. Together, they enter the temple, and Skeleton notices Yunk watching him read a beginner's guide the entire time. She advises him to pay attention to where he's going instead of reading. But Skeleton explains that these manuals contain valuable information about the examiners.
Yunk laughs, telling him that much of the information in those manuals is inaccurate, and it's too late to study them now. Most people analyze this information as soon as they receive their exam notification.
She then takes the manual from him and tosses it aside. However, to her surprise, it's so detailed that she now wonders how Yunk, an NPC, even knows so much about the exam. A few moments later, they are seated, waiting for Chilao to arrive so the competition can begin.
Shortly after, Chilao makes his entrance.
As the rank 5 powerhouse of the Azure world, he is expected to be a dignified figure, but instead, he trips and faceplants into the ground.
The atmosphere turns awkward as the spectators start questioning whether he's truly as powerful as they've heard.
The guard helped him up, which he appreciated, then he began his speech by congratulating everyone who had passed. However, he reminded them that every year, there is always the possibility of an unusual case, so he encouraged everyone not to lose hope.
This exam is divided into 2 parts.
The first exam and the final exam, both filled with tests of wisdom, skill, and dexterity to assess the player's abilities. Next, everyone was asked to take their registration number and proceed to the first location. Since he didn't want to ramble on, he signaled that they could begin. The guard immediately opened the portal, and since everyone had already taken their registration number, the exam officially started. The announcer began broadcasting the Azure Deity Academy entrance exam and welcomed all viewers to the 10th admission competition. After introducing themselves, they explained the entire situation. There were 2,000 participants in this exam, but only 30 would be selected. The first test consisted of 3 sections: body, wisdom, and weapons. On the island, there were 500 objects corresponding to each section. Players had to gather at least 3 objects to meet one of the standards.
If they met 2 standards, they would pass the test. Due to the requirements, players participating in the exam had to be below level 40. Those at lower levels could only pass by working as a team, but the number of phantom weasels was limited. Once they formed teams, they had to decide how to distribute them strategically. The next evaluation was the instrument test, requiring players to assemble parts based on their knowledge.
Every 3 pieces could be combined into a qualified piece, and all these parts came from a single object that had been broken into 500 fragments. Finding and selecting the perfect pieces that fit together was no easy task. The last test was the Wisdom Challenge. Scattered across the island were scrolls, and players had to gather 3 to complete a set. Not only did this formation meet the exam standards, but it also acted as transfer coordinates, making it a crucial part of passing the exam. Now, the players had arrived on the island. What interesting events would unfold this time? The announcer poured all their energy into the exam, eager to observe and enjoy this fascinating competition. Meanwhile, a phantom weasel suddenly caught the scent of prey and instantly charged in for an attack, leaving behind a trail of blue flames. Unfortunately for the creature, its opponent was stronger, reducing it to a mere shadow, just like the other phantom weasels that crossed paths with Skeleton. Though Skeleton hadn't planned on containing this monster in his mission, he saw it as a good opportunity to experiment with his new abilities. With a grin, he declared that the game had officially begun. Meanwhile, a group of low-ranked players hid in the bushes. The Tiger Lady instructed them to listen carefully. She explained that the Phantom Weasel was extremely fast but had weaker turning ability and defense. Therefore, the first step was to predict its movement pattern, surround it, and then launch an attack. However, after waiting for several hours, there had been no activity, making them wonder if they were in the wrong place. The warrior responded to her statement, asking if she doubted his instincts. She looked at him with disdain and warned that she had a terrible temper. If it weren't for the exam rules preventing her from attacking him, she would have already beaten him up. After hearing the exchange, the cat lady sided with the tiger lady, agreeing that her logic made sense. As an array mage, only she could decipher the formation. After waiting a few more minutes, she decided to check the situation herself, given her agility. The warrior tried to stop her, but she ignored him. Moments later, the warrior crouched in frustration, struggling to remain hidden only to be urinated on by a passing dog. Suddenly, the cat lady returned, announcing that there was no need to stay hidden. There were no phantom weasels within a 10-mile radius. She had interrogated a passing player, as the exam prohibited checking forums for information. Apparently, the phantom weasel had already been killed by a beast tamer, which greatly frustrated the warrior, especially after being marked by a dog. In another scene, Skeleton stood at the edge of a cliff, sensing that something was off. He had been walking around for a while, so he wondered why he hadn't encountered any phantom weasels. So far, he had only killed about 200. Meanwhile, the announcer informed the audience that they had just received a message. In the 2 hours since the exam started, the player Ivan Tapingubbles and his level 61 pet had already killed over 200 phantom weasels. Normally, player levels were restricted to 40 or below, but pets had no such limitation. However, it was rare to see a pet surpass its owner's level. As everyone knew, if a pet's level was too high, it would fail to develop loyalty, which could lead to rebellion against its master. At that moment, Skeleton was approached by the cat lady, who had heard he was selling phantom weasels. Delighted to see a potential customer, Skeleton welcomed her in the manner of a true hustler and showed off his stock. Now that the cat lady saw them with her own eyes, she immediately asked how much they cost. Without hesitation, he firmly stated that each one was 50 gold, with no room for negotiation. Hearing such a high price, the cat lady became furious, calling him a scammer, as 1 gold coin was equivalent to $100 in real life. But Skeleton had a way with words. He quickly smoothed things over, treating her like a princess. Using what he had learned from Quantumbras, he attempted to charm her with his charisma. The cat lady attempted to resist, but Skeleton was too much for her. He slyly suggested that he would lower the price if she let him pet her for half a day. She tried with all her might to resist, but as expected, she failed. Moments later, she returned to her companions with the pelts she had acquired. The warrior noticed that she had only brought back 6 pelts, despite their group having 3 members. He questioned her about it, leaving her momentarily baffled. How had someone with his level of intelligence ranked higher than her? She then clarified that they didn't need to fight the phantom weasels directly because they required a soldier to carry the load. To summon one, they needed to break 3 formations. She suggested they stay put instead. Hearing this, the warrior realized he was in serious trouble. He quickly drew his weapons, but unfortunately for him, they were already 1 step ahead. A tentacle immediately wrapped around him, forcing him to drop his weapon and preventing any retaliation. The cat lady then explained that players in the initial trial were not allowed to attack each other. Even if she let him go, he wouldn't be able to harm them, but he could still restrict their movements. This was the John Yang initial formation, which had been cast on his location earlier. They had planned to leave him behind after dealing with the 6 phantom weasels. She reminded him that they were simply following the rules and hoped that fate would not bring them together again. With that, they left him behind. Meanwhile, another group wondered why there were no phantom weasels in the area. They suspected that something was off. Just then, a figure appeared before them, proudly displaying his collection of treasures and asking if they were interested in making a purchase. Don't forget to hit the like button, and thanks for watching.